Excellent. Well, good afternoon. I'm Peggy Moretti. I'm privileged to be the Executive Director of the Historic Preservation League of Oregon. And I got to thank everybody very much for carving time out of their weekends, which I know are very precious, at least they are in my household, to come share a conversation with us about a topic that I think is pretty dear to many people, and that is preserving that unique sense of place that exists here in Portland and the Portland area and in Oregon communities across the state. Our program today, and can you hear me all right? This is all right? Yell if it isn't. Our program today is going to consist of remarks by our special guest speaker, Steven Semes, if you haven't figured that part out already. And then we're going to follow it up with a panel discussion with some really outstanding local experts on the various facets of our topic today. And we'll be taking a few questions at the end from the audience. So we're going to have kind of a little bit of a go of the flow kind of approach to the second half of our program. But we'll all have a chance to weigh in and share some thoughts and questions. Before I go much further, I need to very heartily thank our sponsor, Venerable Properties, who, as you know, also is responsible for this wonderful U of O satellite campus here at the White Stag, and the HPLO is privileged to have our offices upstairs, in fact. Many thanks to Art DeMuro and to Jessica Engeman for their input on this event. Also want to thank John and Mary Zarnecki and Jim Hoyer and Michael Mahaffey, who have really kind of weighed in and helped pull our content together today, and very happy to have them. Also very grateful for the promotional support of the Architectural Heritage Center, the Congress for New Urbanism's Cascadia chapter, and the International Network for Traditional Building Architecture and Urbanism. Today's program really caps off the 2011 Preservation Roundtable. That year's topic was compatible infill design. We had identified from previous work that our historic districts are only going to become truly revitalized if we fill in some of these gaping holes in our districts, the missing teeth, the empty lots. And to do that, though, we needed some clear direction as to what kind of infill ought to be going on. Over 200 people participated in the roundtable sessions, and they included mayors and city commissioners and developers and architects and planners and business people and just general concerned citizens from neighborhood associations. The process culminated in the identification of 7 key principles that we felt would really cover the ground for providing those principles for compatible new construction in historic districts. These were published in a special report, and that was disseminated around the state to CLGs and other various interested parties. You can find a copy of it on our website right now. And we discovered as this got out there that there were a lot of folks who kind of had a sympathetic view of this topic, and that one of the most prominent and popular of them was Steven Semes. And we thought it would just really be wonderful to get him out to the Northwest. And he was kind enough to say, yes, I will give up part of my spring break and come on out to sunny Portland, right, and share some of his experiences. You could have been in the tropics. So Steven W. Semes is a practicing architect for over 30 years. He joined the Notre Dame faculty in 2005. He's the author of 2 books and numerous articles. Professor Semes is particularly interested in the recovery of the classical language of architecture, and his current research focuses on the issue of new architecture in historic settings. He served as the Rome Studies Program Director from 2008 to 2011, and he was flashing his Italian last night. I was very impressed. He's the author of The Future of the Past, a conservation ethic for architecture, urbanism, and historic preservation. And in fact, we do have some copies for sale after the program for those who are interested. He's also the author of The Architecture of the Classical Interior. His articles have appeared in the National Trust Forum Journal, American Arts Quarterly, Traditional Building, Period Homes, and many, many other publications. I could go on, but I think I should just ask Steven to stand up here and share his wisdom with us. Please help me welcome Steven Semes. It can be. I just, sorry, I need to switch presentations here, so let's get you. Sorry, this is the one part that's probably not terribly swift of us. There you go.
Perfect.
Voila.
Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
Thank you, Peggy, and thanks to the Historic Preservation League of Oregon. It's wonderful to be back in Portland, a city I'm just beginning to become acquainted with. It's a wonderful city, although the last time I was here was a little clearer. But anyway, I guess maybe this is more characteristic of Portland in the winter. But in any case, thank you. It's great to be here. Here we go. In the last few years, a lively and long overdue discussion has been growing in the field of historic preservation about how we should add new construction to historic structures or new buildings in historic districts. Many of my readers and attendees at my talks have told me that they had been waiting for this discussion for a long time. Others said they had no idea the discussion was even possible, since they'd always been told that present policy had answered all questions. Still others, including several preservation officials, have told me they agree with a lot of the points that I raise in my talks, but were reluctant to say so in public, and because it might be hazardous to their career advancement. In other words, a subject that had been considered closed for almost half a century and to which everyone was expected to pledge unquestioning allegiance is now being debated openly for the first time in a long time. Today I'd like to share with you some of the views that I've developed in the context of this discussion, and I would like to say that I think that you here in Oregon, and especially with the leadership of the HPLO, are in the forefront of this debate and its potential resolution. I think few people would disagree that in general, preservation policies regarding new construction in historic settings, with some exceptions in some areas, but in general, the policies have been inconsistent and confusing for practitioners and agencies alike. The public is expressing growing irritation against additions or new buildings that seem unnecessarily jarring in comparison to their historic neighbors. People wonder why new buildings cannot be more harmonious with their historic context, and they increasingly blame preservation authorities for not insisting on this. Those architects who practice informed new traditional design complain that their projects are often denied outright, or additional time is required for reviewing and getting permits, or additional cost comes from additional scrutiny given to their designs when they do something in the same style as a landmark neighbor, while it seems like other projects sail right through it because they're sort of fitting the profile of what a lot of the policies seem to be preferring. Consequently, a split has arisen in the ranks of the preservation community, and it's widening on precisely this issue of style, as both professionals and lay people debate what should be the relationship between the architecture of the present and the architecture of the past, especially when they occur together in the same protected setting. Let me give a few examples from my experience in New York, which is the city I know best. There, the Landmarks Preservation Commission approved these three projects, which have substantially altered the character of three classical masterpieces from the turn of the last century by McKim, Mead, and White. While we should be grateful that these works did not suffer the fate of Pennsylvania Station by the same firm, they nonetheless, in my view, have been diminished, their architectural character eroded. All three projects have been praised by critics and cited by some preservation professionals as models of new construction at historic sites, but they are typically seen by traditional architects and by lay people and non-professional preservation supporters as disrespectful and excessively oppositional. It hadn't started out that way, however. In the 1960s, following that tragic loss of Pennsylvania Station, the New York City Landmarks Preservation Commission was given the power to approve or block construction of additions to designated landmarks and infill buildings in historic districts. In 1968, the fight by the Commission to prevent the proposed Marcel Breuer designed tower above Grand Central Terminal, seen here on the left, galvanized the movement nationwide. In its brief to the U.S. Supreme Court, the Commission labeled the scheme, quote, an aesthetic joke, unquote. 10 years later, the court upheld their rejection of the proposal, and in the following decade, similar projects were declined at other landmark sites in New York. But the same commission in 2001 approved the tower by Norman Foster that now rises above Joseph Urban's 1929 Hearst building, thus reversing their earlier precedents. The Foster Tower was approved without opposition, and the commission's chairman at the time called it not a joke, but a completion of the landmark. And in these two cases, what is both by its critics and by its supporters called transgressive design, these two interventions were allowed despite their clearly adversarial relationship to the historic districts in which they appear. The Hugh Hardy designed townhouse on the left is now considered a monument in its own right, and I'm told it would be difficult to gain permission to restore the Greek Revival townhouse destroyed when a terrorist bomb blew up prematurely in 1970. The design seems, to my eye, to perpetuate the damage of the explosion. Sort of like building. The so-called parametric design on the right was recently approved by the same commission, unanimously, I might add. Its design was praised as an example of, quote, the architecture of our time, quote, and, quote, a landmark of the future, unquote. Though what it has to do with the character of the district surrounding it is not clear, shall we say. And yet the same commission also approved these two projects, both of which represent a contrary attitude, one that privileges harmony of materials and style with its historic neighbors. While I personally applaud these two latter decisions, it's difficult to imagine what standards the Commission might use that would justify these diverging judgments. Apparently, they do have a set of standards, although they refuse to publish them. Wisely, perhaps. I should also note that in the case of the Ralph Lauren store, which just opened last year, the project was vigorously opposed by some local preservation organizations who thought the design was too replicative, although it is a copy of no other building. I'm proud to say that a former student of mine was one of the lead designers on this building. Now, I don't mean to pick on New York. Indeed, from Washington to San Francisco, from Boston to, yes, here in Portland, many architects and authorities have seen it as their mission to confront traditional landmark sites with what is called the architecture of our time, an aesthetic agenda that has raised subversion of context into an art form. Now, why has this occurred? The most obvious answer is that contemporary avant-garde design has developed an aggressive style that typically asserts a confrontational attitude to the past. But how do we explain preservation organizations favoring this attitude? Now, if you ask non-ideological architects why they feel compelled to design contrasting buildings in historic settings, they say they are bound by the Preservation Commission's requirements. If you ask the commissions, they say they are following the Secretary of the Interior's standards for rehabilitation. If you talk to senior members of the National Park Service, which oversees the standards and their application to federal grant and tax credit programs, they say the standards are being misinterpreted. Clearly, we need to break out of this circular argument. Let's begin by taking a closer look at the standards themselves. The projects on the screen, naturally, were not subject to the U.S. standards, but they do nonetheless reflect the international fashion for transgressive design in historic settings, which motivates a large part of the new architectural work in the U.S. as well.